The story you shared is one of Spain's most infamous and haunting true crime cases, the Alcácer girls' Crime de Alcácer, which took place in 1992. Here is the complete translation and adaptation of your narrative into American English, capturing that gripping, true crime documentary storytelling style. The Alcácer Girls, A Night of Horror. Peace be upon you. This is the story of three young girls living in a town called Alcácer in Spain. They decided to go to a party hosted by their high school classmates. The party was being held at a cool nightclub in a neighboring town just a few miles away. Initially, the father of one of the girls was supposed to drive them. They were all just 15 and 16 years old. But that day he fell sick and had to cancel. The girls decided they would just wing it. They figured they'd walk down to the highway and hitchhike a ride to the next town. Just as they started heading out, one of the girls, named Esther, suddenly felt a sharp, agonizing pain in her stomach. She was doubled over, feeling completely miserable. She told her friends, "Look guys, I really can't make it, especially since we have to walk all the way to the highway. I'm so sorry, but I gotta head back home." They told her to go rest up. That left the other three girls, who were absolutely determined to get to that party no matter what. They made it to the highway and started thumbing for a ride. Soon enough, an elderly man driving with his wife pulled over. Seeing how young they were, he asked where they were headed. They said, "We're going to Picassent," which was the town right next to Alcácer. The man replied, "All right, I'm heading that way. I can drop you off at the gas station right on the edge of Picassent." The girls hopped in, and once they arrived at the gas station, they thanked the couple and got out. They told them, "We're right at the edge of town now. We can easily just walk the rest of the way." So the three girls started walking, each carrying her backpack, the shortcut through the farmlands. To get to the town center where the club was, they decided to veer off the main highway to take a shortcut. If you know how rural Spain or Europe is set up, they have these massive farmlands. Right in the middle of these fields, you'll often find a farmhouse or an old church, connected by unpaved dirt roads. To save time, the girls started cutting straight through these private properties, crossing from one farm to another, passing houses and old churches. While they were on one of these dirt roads heading toward the center, a guy they knew from school rode past them. It looked like he was actually leaving the party early. He waved at them from a distance and kept moving in a hurry. The girls kept walking, but the club was still a few miles out. Darkness was falling, and they were getting exhausted. Then, a car pulled up beside them with two young men inside. They rolled down the window and asked, "Where are you girls heading?" They answered, "We're trying to get to Kohler, the nightclub in the center of town." The guys smiled and said, "What a coincidence. We're heading right there. Hop in. We'll give you a lift." Relieved and excited, the girls jumped into the back seat without a second thought. The car sped off. They drove until they were right near the club, but instead of braking, the driver slammed on the gas. He blew right past the club, tore through the town center, and headed straight out of the city. Panic set in. The girls started crying, screaming, and begging the men to stop the car. The two men started hitting them, threatening that if they didn't shut up, things would get ugly. They lied and promised they would take them back, but instead they drove deeper into the mountains, navigating rough, rocky terrain and steep cliffs in pitch darkness. They finally pulled up to an ancient, abandoned house hidden deep in the hills. The two men forced the terrified girls out of the car at gunpoint, beating them as they marched them inside. The disappearance and the global search. The girls never made it home. By the next morning, their parents were frantic with worry. They began searching everywhere and quickly found out that Esther, who was supposed to go with them, had stayed behind because she was sick. That stomachache literally saved her life. When the families contacted the party organizers and classmates, everyone confirmed the same terrifying detail. The three girls never showed up at the club. However, the school friend who had passed them on the road came forward. He told the police, "Yes, I saw them. They were walking down the dirt path heading toward the town center. I waved at them from a distance and kept driving." The community flipped the town upside down looking for them. They searched farms, abandoned buildings, and fields, but found absolutely nothing. Then, The elderly man who had given them a ride heard the news. He went straight to the police and said, "My wife and I picked up 3 young girls matching their description on the highway that night, and we dropped them off at the Picasso gas station." This perfectly lined up with the classmates' timeline. The search exploded into a massive operation. Search parties, volunteers, K-9 units, and tracking experts used every piece of modern and traditional technology available, but the girls had vanished without a trace. The story gripped the entire nation, spreading terror among parents. It became so massive that the Prime Minister of Spain at the time, Felipe González, personally met with the families. He promised to expand the search globally, coordinating with Interpol and sending the girls' photos across Europe and North Africa, fearing they might have been victims of a human trafficking ring. But months passed, and there was nothing but deafening silence, a horrific discovery. 75 days later, about 2.5 months after the disappearance, 2 beekeepers were tending to their hives deep in those remote mountains. They were navigating a treacherous, overgrown area that no ordinary hiker would ever stumble upon, unless they had a specific reason to be there. As they walked through the thick brush, one of them noticed something unusual. There was a pile of freshly cut tree branches stacked up artificially, like a makeshift mound. Peeking out from underneath the branches was something metallic reflecting the sunlight. Curious, the man walked over and reached down into the brush to grab the shiny object. He pulled it, and horror struck. It was a watch. But when he pulled it, he realized it was still strapped to a severely decomposed human arm. The shock sent him into a panic. The 2 men ran as fast as they could back to the main road and called the authorities. When forensic teams cleared the pile of branches, they didn't find just one body. They found 3. The bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition and carried no identification, but it was clear they were the missing teenagers. The parents were called in, and dental records and forensic tests confirmed the devastating truth. The Alcácer girls had been found. When the final autopsy report came out, it shocked the entire country. The details were utterly sadistic. The girls had been subjected to unspeakable, prolonged torture. The killers had used tools, scissors to mutilate them, and iron rods heated over a fire to burn their flesh. They had kept them alive for a long time, torturing them until they could no longer bear the pain. When the killers decided to end it, they marched the girls to the mouth of a nearby cave, forced them to their knees, and executed them with gunshots to the head before covering them with branches, turning the forest upside down. The national outcry was unprecedented. The public was devastated that a simple mistake, trusting strangers for a ride, had led to such a brutal end. The investigation went into overdrive. Police interrogated classmates, partygoers, and even the sick father and Esther, but they were all cleared. Frustrated by the lack of leads, the lead investigator ordered his team back to the crime scene for a meticulous sweep. That's when they got a lucky break. Scattered on the forest floor near the burial site, they found tiny, shredded pieces of paper. Despite the wind, officers combed the entire forest grid, collecting every single piece like a puzzle. When they pieced them together, they discovered it was a medical report from a local hospital belonging to a man named Enrique. The police rushed to Enrique's house and arrested him. During intense interrogation, Enrique denied knowing the girls or anything about the party. He provided a solid alibi. He was actually at the hospital receiving treatment at the time. However, detectives knew whoever dropped those papers must have had access to Enrique's car or house. They looked into his family and struck gold. Enrique had a brother named Antonio Anglés, a hardened criminal with a violent rap sheet. Antonio had previously been imprisoned for kidnapping and brutally torturing his own girlfriend, chaining her to a light pole because she had stolen a stash of drugs he was trying to sell. The police knew they had their man, but by the time they went to arrest him, Antonio had already vanished. He knew they had picked up his brother, and he flew under the radar. The partner and the great escape. Police then targeted Antonio's inner circle and arrested his best friend and partner in crime, Miguel Ricart. Once Miguel was in custody, he cracked immediately. Realizing the police were closing in, he confessed to everything. Miguel detailed the entire night. There was an old, abandoned warehouse hidden deep in the forest that people used to use for storage. Antonio and I used it as a hideout to shoot up and deal drugs. That night, we were driving up there to get high when we saw the 3 girls hitchhiking. We offered them a ride, and they got in. We saw it as an opportunity to take them to our spot. He continued, once they realized where we were going, they started screaming, but we threatened them with a gun and dragged them into the warehouse. Under the influence of heavy drugs, we threw a sadistic party of our own, beating and assaulting them. When we were done with the first round, we tied them up, left them alive, and actually drove down to a restaurant to have dinner. After we ate, we drove back to the warehouse to continue torturing them. Finally, we marched them at gunpoint to the cave, made them kneel, shot them, and covered them with branches. Now, the international manhunt was on for the mastermind, Antonio Angles. Antonio was a ghost. During the hunt, police questioned a local hairstylist who dropped a bombshell. Antonio had come into his shop and demanded his hair and eyebrows be bleached bright blonde to completely alter his appearance. Using this new description, they tracked him escaping across the border into Lisbon, Portugal. The Portuguese authorities launched a massive manhunt, but Antonio managed to sneak onto a cargo ship bound for Ireland. When international authorities realized the fugitive was on board, a multi-nation tactical team was dispatched to intercept the ship in the middle of the ocean. But as the authorities boarded the vessel to arrest him, Antonio Angles did something insane. He leaped off the deck into the freezing open sea and vanished. Search planes and boats combed the surrounding islands, but no body or trace was ever found. To this day, it is unknown if he successfully swam to an island and adopted a new identity, or if he drowned in the Atlantic. As for Miguel Ricart, he was put on trial and sentenced to a staggering 170 years in prison. However, due to changes in Spanish sentencing laws, the abolishment of the Parot doctrine, he was released in 2013 after serving just 21 years. He immediately went into hiding and disappeared from public view. The conspiracy theories. You might think the story ends there, but it doesn't. Years later, massive question marks began to surface, turning this case into one of the biggest conspiracy theories in Spanish history. Many journalists, criminologists, and even some of the victims' fathers began pointing out bizarre inconsistencies. The escape. People found it highly convenient that Antonio Angles, a petty thug, managed to evade multiple international police forces, board a secure ship, jump into the ocean, and disappear forever. Rumors spread that the girls were actually kidnapped and murdered by high-profile, powerful elites or politicians with sadistic fetches, and that Antonio and Miguel were just low-level fall guys hired to take the blame. The copycat elements. A few years prior to this crime, 2 girls and a boy were found murdered in a neighboring town, using the exact same brutal torture methods. The killer in that older case was never caught, and neither Antonio nor Miguel were suspects in it. The money mystery. The girls were supposedly heading to a high-end nightclub that required an entrance fee, money for drinks, and transportation costs. Yet, when their belongings were recovered, not a single one of them carried a single peseta, the currency at the time. Conspiracy theorists argue the girls were never going to a school party. They were lured or blackmailed into meeting wealthy individuals who promised them money, only to be brutally murdered. The public outcry over these theories became so intense that it sparked a massive investigation into the original police handling of the case. It was revealed that the original crime scene had been compromised, evidence was mishandled, and unidentified DNA profiles, hairs found on the bodies, mysteriously vanished from the evidence lockers. To this day, the Alcácer case remains deeply controversial, clouded in mystery, cover-up allegations, and horror. And that is the end of the story. Take care and goodbye.